All right, everybody, welcome back in. We've got a few folks still mingling their way in from the coffee bar. That's the problem with good coffee. Keeps folks pinned down at the grinder. Okay, let's get into what may be one of the most contentious topics that we're going to talk about in connected cars today, and that is where connectivity is powering autonomy, self-driving cars, and whether you believe or don't believe that that's the future. You probably have a pretty strong opinion one way or the other. I don't find a lot of folks who go, oh, self-driving cars, okay. It's either love or hate, at least at this point. Let's bring on our panel now to discuss the pros and cons of connected autonomy. I'll bring our panelists on one at a time here, starting with Bernard Soriano, who's Deputy Director of the California DMV. Please welcome Bernard. Of course, they've been involved in some of the very cutting-edge permitting of self-driving cars on roads. Please welcome Jeff Klei, who's President of Continental, North America Division. Continental, a major supplier of autonomous technology. Alberto Broggi is Director of Artificial Vision and Intelligent Systems at the University of Parma in Italy. Please welcome Alberto. And to lead our panel, a real expert in the space, please welcome Damon Lavrinc, Silicon Valley editor at Jalopnik.
Thanks, sir. So today's topic is very broad. We're going to be discussing both the onboard side of autonomous cars, but also the vehicle-to-vehicle communications, the vehicle-to-infrastructure communications, and some of the questions that these systems bring, along with some of the more dirtier aspects of it, including the privacy side and that kind of thing. And honestly, our panel has been really great so far. We've discussed a lot of things over the course of the last few weeks, and I think one of the larger issues for anybody that's still on the fence about this space is how reliable these systems are. And that reliability seems to be pegged to two different aspects of it. We've got the data connection that's coming into the car that's feeding information. And then we have the onboard systems, the vision systems that you're working on, and radar sensors, LiDAR sensors, and that kind of thing. I don't think anybody in this room particularly thinks that it's going to be one or the other. But to a certain extent, they have to be operating simultaneously, and they also have to operate independently if one of those things goes wrong to a certain extent. First of all, Alberto, I wanted to kind of get your perspective on what's going on in your field right now that you've been most impressed by in the last, say, 6 months, 8 months or so, that's really going to bring the vision game forward.
Yeah, we're working on vision for vehicles. Mm-hmm. Actually, we are trying to put cameras on cars to understand the world around the car, in front and the back and the sides. And what I'm seeing as the breakthrough actually is putting together many cameras instead of just one. Putting together two cameras. Mm-hmm. With two cameras, you have the possibility to detect the 3D in front of your car. And if you put many of those sensors, then you can have a full 3D reconstruction all around the car. And this is what we are working on right now. So we try to do be more reactive to the world. Mm-hmm. So we try to understand what's around us with a passive sensor, low-cost sensor, instead of having the highly expensive lasers. Right.
Well, I guess that's the obvious question. Is I live in the Bay Area. I actually see the autonomous cars from Google testing, or have in the past, relatively regularly. Can these camera systems do a better job than the LiDAR systems that are currently employed?
Yeah, you have a lot of advantages of using cameras. Actually, you have a pretty higher resolution, mm-hmm. 10 times the resolution of a spinning laser. And a fraction of the cost. So currently you are able to do the processing, stereo matching between the two views on a fairly low-cost sensor, low-cost processing system. Mm-hmm. So that enables a lot of different things, because once you have the two cameras that gets you the two images, and then you have the 3D reconstruction, you can run your algorithms on the 3D point cloud that you have, which is a data structure which is very similar to what Google, for example, is using. Mm-hmm. But this is really highly more denser. You have more resolution, so you can have more details around you.
But you still have to be relying on some kind of maps, I assume, correct?
Not really. Well, the maps is good to have, but what we do is we try to be more reactive to the world. Okay. So we don't really go around and map the area with a very high accuracy, but we try to understand the world thanks to the use of cameras.
Okay. No,
so we don't use the maps. We use what you can get out of the processing of the image.
Yeah. And Jeff, the data side of things is kind of your side of the business to a large extent. We've got the program in Michigan right now that's doing their V2V systems and V2I systems, which I actually had a chance to sample a few months ago. We've got a program in Germany that's going on. From a data perspective, do you see that as being the primary input for these autonomous functionalities, or do you see kind of this hybrid approach between the onboard systems and also the data?
Yeah, we clearly see it as a hybrid. We don't think that just onboard sensors or data coming from the clouds is going to allow you to do everything that you want to do. So we see it as a step function, a stepwise approach. Clearly, today it's more of onboard. There's not much coming from the cloud today, but we see that as the next evolution and the next way to really take the functionality and the redundancy that you talked about to the next level. Yeah. And so that connection to the cloud for us is really the next step.
See, but to me that always seems to be the sticking point, because I'm walking around this convention center. I've got AT&T, unfortunately, and I'm losing connection all the time. Google systems, they rely on a data connection to an extent, but so much of that information is stored on board. How can we really reliably use the data connection, be it through a cellular provider or somebody else, to make sure that even if, if we're in a rural area, if we're in a very congested area where there's a lot of cell traffic, how can we kind of get beyond that issue?
It's a great question. Actually, we got to get you in the car that we have downstairs, and it's our next generation of connection to the external world. Our vision of how that connectivity can be safe, it can be secure, but it can also be reliable. And what we've done is we've teamed up with Cisco. And with Cisco, I mean, they're obviously a very, very strong partner in the network, in the data security, in the data processing and switching. So what we do is we'll look at 3G, 4G, any cell phone connection that we trust, right? If there's 3 cell phones in the car, we'll use any one of them to connect to the cloud. And we'll aggregate the processing power as well. So if all 3 of us have phones at 1 megabyte per second, we can actually aggregate those and we can bring it in at 3. And we can go Wi-Fi, we can do any signal. It's also seamless as you go through a tunnel. If you're downloading something, if you're watching, downloading to the vehicle or watching a video, it actually will stop and re-pick up with whatever signal's available on the other side seamlessly. It won't restart the download, and it's all done on board.
Do you think the major telecoms are actually up to providing that amount of information?
Sure. I mean, it's available today. I mean, we're doing it today, so I'm not.
Well, but we're doing it today, but we're also not doing it particularly well. I mean.
Well, but no car on the road today has this capability.
And that's what I'm saying.
Where
is
we can
as
switch
this scales
and
out,
aggregate.
yeah. As this scales out, though, as more people have connected devices, as more cars are connected, streaming music, streaming movies, all this other stuff, are we going to have the bandwidth to actually keep this communication line open?
It's happening today. People in their cars, on their iPads, on their phones, they're streaming things. You're just not doing it through the car. And by aggregating the data and aggregating all the signals, especially if you start bringing Wi-Fi, and you can, as you pass a Wi-Fi zone, if it's a public Wi-Fi zone, and we're showing it downstairs, we're going back and forth between the onboard network access device, the 2 phones that are connected by the people around. We could connect your phone and watch how your phone impacts the speed, as well as the Wi-Fi within the conference.
And then prioritize it from there.
And then it's user priority or it's OEM priority. We'll prioritize what that data is used for. If there's a critical safety event, obviously we're going to get priority. Yeah. We're not going to stream video for your kids in the back seat watching a movie.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But the data's there today, and it's being used today. It's just a matter of using it smarter and more seamlessly.
Yeah. Bernard, DMV's been, actually California DMV in particular, has been very much at the cutting edge of this. I know you guys have been talking with Google and a lot of other companies, including Continental. Between California, Nevada, Florida, kind of the 3 major states that are really kind of pushing towards getting autonomous testing in the states.
Let's not forget Michigan. Let's throw some love their way as well.
Of course, yeah. I was thinking of the first 3 to really adopt it. What have you found? Talking with these companies, when it comes to the kind of information they're putting in, what's been the biggest issue from a regulatory standpoint? What do you feel is their biggest concern right now?
Well, from our standpoint, as you mentioned, our charge is to develop the regulations to allow the vehicles on our roadways. And you mentioned the reliability earlier, and that's certainly one of the big concerns that we have is ensuring that these vehicles are reliable, or the sensors are reliable. At the same time, as we develop the regulations, they need to be technology agnostic. So while we need to be able to allow the manufacturers, the OEMs, the Tier 1 suppliers to be able to use their creative juices to develop the products necessary, we also still need to provide a framework to ensure that those products are safe. That is the biggest issue that we have to deal with, because in doing that, we need to be able to understand what is being developed and what timeline it's being developed to, when the technology is going to be available, and all of that is changing. So it's a very difficult thing to try and regulate something that changes very quickly. I mean, maybe not as quickly as in the pure IT sense, but still the technology is developing. And as we develop the regulations, we need to keep close contact with the manufacturers to gain that understanding.
Well, and you brought up a standard earlier, and this we're seeing different standards being developed, be them even down to whether people are using Wi-Fi or different bands, different radio bands, and that kind of thing. How can you possibly regulate something that's moving so quickly?
Well, that is the challenge, right? And as an engineer, engineers really love standards, because then we know what to build to, right? And the lack of standards is something that the industry has to deal with autonomous vehicles. Just something as basic. We're talking about connectivity here. We're talking about either V2V, V2I, or just pure autonomous driving vehicles. And in the perfect world, we would have had V2V in place, V2I in place, and then autonomous vehicles would show up.
Well, that's still kind of the roadmap right now to a large extent.
Except some companies are jumping right to autonomous vehicles. And so from a regulatory standpoint, we have to be ready for that, and we have to deal with that. And so all of these options are available, and all of these different scenarios are possibilities in terms of what's going to come to market first.
And do you believe that the government or private industry should set those standards?
Well, I think that it needs to. I think standards need to be developed in a cohesive fashion. Developing standards is not a trivial thing. I mean, it takes a lot of people working together to try and develop what would make sense and what would work for all of the different companies.
Alberto, getting back to the vision side of things, I can't help but think, and the privacy thing comes up obviously very frequently in this conversation. I can't help but think when you've got 2, 3, 4 cameras on board, and on board the car, and you've got the potential for the same issues that Google dealt with when it came to their Street View mapping system. How do you envision that data not being able to be accessed by a third party or being encrypted somehow or something like that?
Yeah, actually, we do not. I mean, we use the data, and we do not broadcast the data. So we acquire the data, we process the data to understand what's in front of the car, and then the synthetic representation is then used to drive the car. But the data itself is not made available to anybody. So there's no privacy issue here. So you're just keeping the data into the processing box.
Ideally,
and that's it. Yeah.
Understandably, okay. The security issue, anybody that talks about autonomous cars, one of the first things they bring up after the legal issue of who's at fault, the car, the driver, the chip maker, the software manufacturer, is when I was working at Wired, we were covering the Edward Snowden leaks. And while most people were kind of outraged at it, after 6 months there was kind of a collective, meh, didn't really seem to care about it as much. I'm The larger issue when it comes to autonomous cars is that's much more direct. Now, of course, we're all carrying a device in our pockets that's tracking our location all the time. But privacy advocates are always bringing up this fact that autonomous cars are going to be the absolute death of personal privacy. Jeff, how do you see kind of the back end of this preventing that?
Well, it starts with that connection, the security of the connection and the data privacy pledge that the OEMs have all come together and said we pledged to keep the data private. I think is a big step. But it's a trusted connection. You only connect with devices, you only connect with sources that you trust. And whether it's a car-to-car or car-to-infrastructure, they're going to be trusted. There are going to be standards that will be set for those communication protocols. And cybersecurity is not new. I mean, cybersecurity didn't come about because of autonomous driving. Cybersecurity is something we're dealing with every day in every module we make, whether it's a body control module or an engine controller or a brake controller, we're dealing with cybersecurity today. So it's not new. And we're learning a lot about cybersecurity and the way to protect the data.
Right.
But at the end, we'll work through that. To me, that's not the big issue that will prevent us from getting to autonomous driving.
What's the big issue then?
The big issue is I think it's adoption rates. Is the consumer going to be ready for it? 78% of the people today say that they love their adaptive cruise control and their other advanced driver assistance systems, but 66% of them say autonomous driving scares me.
Well,
so are people ready for it?
Right.
And the cost is the other one. People say that I'm only willing to pay $1,500 for highway speed autonomous driving. Well, $1,500, I can't put the sensors alone on the vehicle for $1,500. So it's going to be an adaptation by the consumers. It's going to be the technology. It's going to be the connection to the cloud. It's going to be the infrastructure. It will happen step by step by step. It's not going to be a jump to full autonomous driving.
No, and I think that's been largely proven. I mean, we've seen this slow adoption of, like you said, radar-assisted cruise control, now lane keep assist. We're going to be seeing, Cadillac Super Cruise and a few other systems in the near future. So it's, just like people kind of freaking out about cruise control back in the 70s, or my personal favorite, people freaking out about radios back in the 20s, saying, "Oh, it's going to cause all these distractions. People are going to die." It sounds really familiar when I think about it. But the larger issue being, with this much data coming on board, you're finally tying what's essentially a data connection to systems that had never really seen a connection before, the CAN bus system and all that. I know cybersecurity has been around for years, and but this is a whole different breed of it because we're talking about people and their families.
It depends on what you give them access to. I mean, they're not going to have access to everything that's in the car. And
but to keep an autonomous car going, you have to have acceleration, braking, steering, all of that across the board. So again, we're tying into these systems that we've never tied into before. And yeah, I think any good security individual can keep a Linux system relatively safe, but the keyword there is relatively. And that's where I think the larger concern comes into play.
Yeah, we look at more the benefits of it as well. I mean, 95% of the accidents are by driver error. And much of this autonomous driving, or we call it automated driving,
right.
Whether it's partially, highly, or fully automated, it will save lives. And I think if we think of the benefits and not just the downside, I think people will begin to understand that it's going to happen slowly, and it's going to happen safely.
Are you telling me the public doesn't always see the benefits of?
I think what will happen is the first accident, it will be a field day for the legal community and the media and everyone else. But how many lives are going to be saved as this technology comes to the market?
Gotcha.
And I think that's what we all have to look at, is there will be roadblocks, but we'll get through them.
Excellent. Anything you want to add?
No, I totally agree. The technology is going to be coming out not as a step function, it's going to be a ramp function, incremental advances. But overall, the big picture, I mean, we suck as drivers. And we license them, right?
But 85% of drivers say they're good drivers.
Right.
Right?
But the technology is bound to decrease that number. The estimates are anywhere upwards of 97% of all fatalities are because of human error. And, whatever that number is, it's a big number.
The vast majority, yeah.
And no one's saying that number is going to go to zero with autonomous vehicles, but that number is going to decrease. And any decrease in that number is a good thing for society. So I totally agree with what you were saying.
Well, we've got a few minutes left for Q&A, so I'd like to open it up to anybody that has any questions. I think we can get the house lights up and let somebody jump in. Don't be bashful. Please.
I agree with you that we suck at driving. So if we as drivers rely more and more on autonomous driving, are we going to develop ourselves into the pilots of the Flight 447 who crashed perfectly good flight because they did not know how to fly the plane manually when the pitot tubes froze? Putting this into cars, is it likely that our little driving skills that we have will deteriorate so much that by the time we finally have to take control of the wheel, we'll suck even more at it?
Right. That's a great question, and that's exactly an issue that we are debating now as we develop the regulations. Now, you know, a lot of it depends upon the technology that rolls out. If level 3 vehicles are going to be the norm, we have to be vigilant in ensuring that people who are the backup systems to these vehicles are still adequately trained and their skills are still honed to where they can take over in an appropriate fashion. If it's a level 4 car, then it becomes a moot point. But you know, we'll see how many level 4 cars are out there. So yes, that's an issue that has come up more than once, and that's an issue that we are discussing internally. We're also discussing that across the nation because it's not just a California issue. When these vehicles roll out, there will be other jurisdictions where drivers or passengers or operators are going to be utilizing these vehicles. And so that's a real good concern that we have to deal with.
I think the whole HMI is one of the big issues that we have to get to this autonomous. And how do you disengage the driver as you go into an autonomous mode? And how do you re-engage the driver when it's required? And how do you inform the driver you need to re-engage and what the driving scenario is that forced you to have to take over? And what information do they need and how quickly do they need it? And this is one of the issues that I think as an industry we have to face. And at Continental we're doing a lot of studies and a lot of research on the HMI part of it. Obviously that's one of our core areas of business. We're one of the leaders in HUD development. And we've got products now for augmented reality to try and do exactly that, to help bring that driver back in a timely fashion in a way that they can understand why they're taking this driving task back over. And that's going to be needed, you know, kind of in phase 2. Full autonomous, you don't have to worry about the driver coming back in, but that's a long way off.
And by the way, speaking as a former driving instructor in my previous life, 8 years of it, we just need better standards for drivers anyway. You go to Europe, you go to Japan, totally different story than it is out here. So thank you very much.
Once we can drive without speed limit on our autobahns, maybe we should.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, accidents happen in a fraction of a second, and you know, if you live out in Chicago, you have cars spinning out, and they don't necessarily show up on maps. So, how realistically can communication resolve safety issues? I understand it for infotainment and getting updated information, but is there really a play for communication with safety?
Absolutely.
Well, I think Alberto can probably speak to that even better, just because the systems you're developing are exactly to see that, right?
Yeah, we're actually using, we would be using communication for, as a kind of augmented sensing, but I'm not sure that communication is solving the problem with being able to deliver the information up to the minute and very, well, maybe you don't have the bandwidth, you don't have the coverage in some situations.
Latency between the V to V
latency, I mean, yeah, I'm sure that with many different communication means you can have a large bandwidth, but there could be some situations in which you don't have the bandwidth, you don't have communication going on, and if you're driving a safety critical system, so your life is in danger if you don't get the information. So it's good to have, definitely.
But again, we get down to this hybrid approach, right?
Yeah,
the onboard
course,
systems plus the data and all that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sir.
Yes, hi, I'm Jean-François Tremblay with EY, Ernst & Young. A question about the incremental growth that we hope to see in that space. Could you please tell me what your perspective is on the role of cities, that is urban context, in order to support that slow but steady growth in the implementation of autonomous vehicles?
Well, again, I think this gets back to our comment earlier about, you know, should this be a commercial push? Should the government be involved somehow? Should municipalities have a hand in it? Bernard, you might be able to speak to this to an extent.
So the, as far as local transportation authorities or local cities that need to be involved, you know, that comes into play when vehicle to infrastructure communication systems need to be put in place. That's a huge infrastructure investment. And that's a huge strategic decision that needs to be made by that community. And in some cases, that's a bitter pill to swallow, to try and put money into an infrastructure when there are some other needs that the community may have. That certainly is a concern, and that probably is one of the reasons why V2I technology has not matured as quickly. From what I've seen, most definitely the locals need to be involved in any type of rollout of the technology because of that infrastructure investment that needs to be made.
And they need to see a financial advantage at the very root of that debate. Otherwise, they're not going to invest in that V2I infrastructure that needs to be put in place, right?
Mm-hmm. That's part of the reason why the urban driving scenarios for autonomous driving are probably one of the more complex and the more difficult, because you need that vehicle to infrastructure and just to get as much information as you can. You know, highway driving, even at highway speeds, it's pretty simple stuff. Yeah. On ramp to exit ramp, compared to a city environment with all the different lane changes and all the different signs and all the different complex situations that you'll encounter.
I know we're just out of time right now. Do we have time for just 2 more questions? Is that going to be okay? Great. Please, sir.
Hi. Scott Pytash with Michelin North America. We talked about how we really suck at driving. I'm wondering, can you comment on how we might use autonomous vehicles to teach people to be better drivers?
Wow. Actually, this is something that I talked about to a driving school industry a while ago, and it was mainly the use of some of the vision systems, so like Mobilize systems, to get students to increase their pace between drivers. So using a combination of lead follow exercises like you normally would on, like, say, a racetrack, but using the radar-assisted cruise control systems, using the onboard cameras. I've actually got colleagues of mine in LA that use eye tracking cameras to make sure that their students are glancing up the mirrors on a regular basis and that kind of thing. I'm not sure so much the autonomous side of things is going to help out, and I'll let you guys jump in if you'd like, but I think there's definitely a potential to get rid of my old job to a certain extent, more so with obviously the adoption of these systems than the educational side of things. But if you guys want to jump in.
I think it's a novel concept. I'm not sure where you went, but here you go. I think it's a novel concept, and I can honestly say that's the first time someone has brought that up in all of the discussions that we've had. So yeah, thank you.
I think with all the hardware and all the sensors on the vehicle and all the information, you could certainly use it to educate drivers.
Yeah, no,
which we haven't really thought much about it, but it's, I mean, you know where the vehicle is compared to the lane, you know where the driver recognition cameras and the technology, you know where the driver's looking, you know how they're thinking, you know if they're texting, you know if they're looking in the right direction with a vehicle that's coming in from this direction. If they're looking over here, you can bring them back in focus. You can do all that.
And
we haven't thought about it.
And from a gearhead's perspective, BMW's already done it with their track trainer. You know, they map Laguna Seca, GPS waypoints around, and they could tow a line. Well, I don't want to say how much time they took off my lap time, but it was significant. So I think that's it. We're good. Excellent. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. That was great.